Earlier this afternoon, we also heard from Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner that testimony talking about regulatory reform and some of the proposals that have been put forth before Congress, some of those proposals put forth by the Obama administration. Let us now turn to a couple of our guests, a former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, for his views on the Obama financial regulatory reform plan. Adam Posen is the Deputy Director of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. This September, he joins the Bank of England as a member of its Monetary Policy Committee and becomes a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute. And Charles Taylor, Director of the Financial Regulation Task Force at Pew Charitable Trust. Both gentlemen joining me this afternoon, and welcome to Bloomberg News to both of you. Mr. Posen, I might begin with you. So far, what you've heard today, specifically that earlier testimony from Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner.
Yeah, I think the Obama administration proposals as put forward by Geithner go insufficiently far, and as is the case always, they're getting too caught up in who does what. I think you had a quote about Secretary Geithner saying, we don't want to have dumb regulation. Well, actually, that's wrong. What you want is dumb regulation. All the previous regulation was so clever and cleverly calibrated that there was lots of room for regulators and banks to interpret it their own way and have lots of space to play. You want dumb, simple, big rules preventing things from happening, and I don't see that yet.
Mr. Taylor, I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think this is a complex set of problems, and we're early in considering how to deal with them. I'm very sympathetic with Alex Posen's point of view here, and I think one of the things we've got to step back and do is develop a better vision of where we're heading. Then we can make more sense of the smorgasbord of proposals that constitutes the Treasury proposal today.
Mr. Posen, there seemed to be a clash of ideas here at the hearing. Chairman Bernanke told lawmakers that the central bank should remain in charge of consumer financial protection. However, Treasury Secretary Geithner called for support of a new consumer financial protection agency that's been proposed by the Obama administration. Is that going to cause problems going forward?
I don't think it does. I mean, there's clearly a disagreement there, but it'll be decided, and then it goes. I mean, the central bank, remember, including the Fed, in the early 2000s, were busy trying to get out of the consumer protection business. They essentially, under Greenspan, and unfortunately even initially under Bernanke, they let the mortgage oversight that they had within their power just sort of slip away. They didn't really enforce it. So I'm not quite sure why they feel the need to fight for it now, nor am I quite sure why the Congress people need to think that it's good to have the Fed have it. I think the Obama team, Geithner, has the right idea here.
Mr. Taylor, you say that they need a vision, and you're adamant. You say they need to get it right. What do they need to do to make that happen?
Well, for example, in this area of consumer financial protection, the key question is to have really effective protection, and probably that means very strong disclosure. Whether you get that through a consumer financial protection agency or through beefing up the financial protection components and the existing agencies responsible for that is a secondary matter. And first of all, you've got to figure out what you really want to do to make protection work better.
Mr. Posen, what about this talk about the Fed being a systemic risk regulator? Does this give the Fed too much authority?
Well, I just want to say Mr. Taylor was right in what he just said about the consumer protection and in the general spirit. And so the issue, again, systemic risk regulator. If you're going to give it to anybody, give it to the Fed. But why have it be this thing where they're making judgmental assessments?
Right.
Right now, you know, they've got it so that it's all set up. Oh, they're going to decide which firms are systemically important and then decide how much to charge them for it and decide when they slip in and out. We should be thinking, and again, this is kind of like what Mr. Taylor says, although this would be my opinion, we should be thinking about a system with many smaller institutions. We should be thinking about a system with lots of barriers.
Adam Posen, Charles Taylor, I'll ask you both to stay with us. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be back with the gentleman talking about financial regulatory reform on Capitol Hill. We'll be right back. And we're back with Adam Posen, the Deputy Director of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and Charles Taylor, Director of the Pew Financial Reform Project. We're talking about today's testimony on Capitol Hill before the House Financial Services Committee. Among those testifying today, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, and FDIC Chair Sheila Bair. Mr. Taylor, before the break, I was talking to Mr. Posen about the systemic risk regulator. You have some problems with the Fed being the systemic risk regulator. Why?
Well, I think the main reason we put our task force together, which is very bipartisan, spanning the entire spectrum from left to right and comprising real experts in the field, was because we wanted to get at questions like, what is systemic risk regulation going to be? I think, for example, monitoring the system for emergent systemic risk is very difficult to do. Once we've settled questions like that, I think we can begin to focus on who should do it.
Well, is there a question, gentlemen, that is there a need for a systemic risk regulator, or is it just that there hasn't been enough transparency and some folks have been asleep at the switch? Mr. Posen?
I don't think it's a transparency issue. I think it's a self-delusion issue. I think from the mid-90s into the mid-2000s, most of the economics profession, most of the regulators, to some degree myself included, all thought, well, these banks can largely self-regulate, and if they're looking after themselves, they can't accumulate into this risk pattern we call systemic risk. That turns out to be false, and that really is the fundamental problem with the Obama-Geithner approach to all this, is they're still acting as though we haven't disproven all that there's a very fine thing to calibrate just how much is too much regulation. Whereas right now, you know, the instinct should be, wow, we really didn't do that bad in the 70s and 80s before any of this happened. So that's where I start to get a little frustrated.
I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think questions like, you know, is the system as a whole stable? Sometimes those come down to our individual institutions stable, but sometimes it's to do with the way they interact. And that's something that our regulators haven't paid enough attention to in the past. We've got to focus on those things in the future.
Charles Taylor of Pew Charitable Trust, Adam Posen of the Peterson Institute for International Economics joining us from Washington. Gentlemen, thanks.